Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another ranked video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Scream franchise. Now, the Scream franchise, of course, is one of the most iconic franchises in horror history, and it is still growing strong with Scream 7 currently in the works. So I thought in anticipation of the new movie we would go back and take a look and see how I personally would rank all 6 of the previous Scream movies. Now before we continue, as I always point out of my other lists, it's important to remember this is just my personal list of the way that I would rank the Scream films. So coming in at number 6, at the bottom of the barrel, we have Scream 3. Now I should say before I continue that I honestly think that every single one of the Scream movies is good. I really like Scream 3, but that just goes to show you that the one that's at the bottom of the list, even that one, I really like and enjoy and have fun. I mean, that just goes to show you how strong this is of a franchise overall. The big change from the first 2 movies in this one is that, of course, the setting is different, this time taking place on the set of them filming Stab 3, which, of course, is the fictional series of films in the Scream universe based on the events of the films. This honestly might actually be my favorite setting of all of the Scream movies. And I think, honestly, it makes total sense that Sidney as well would be pretty much kind of isolated and have trust issues at this point. I thought that's probably the most realistic element of this entire film. But that being said, I think that this one definitely does have a few shortcomings. First thing, honestly, that I just don't really like about this movie is the voice changer in this one. Previously established the voice modulator that makes anybody who talks into it can sound like Ghostface, but here, of course, with the voice changer in this film, we perfectly replicate any of the characters' voices, so you don't know who's calling. And I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to, for the third one to kind of up the ante a bit by having it be where you don't know who you can trust type of thing, but this to me just feels so kind of out there when it comes to Scream. And what I like about the Scream franchise, particularly the first 2 films, it felt more like a sort of grounded in reality type of thing. They're referring to, horror movies and stuff, and there was a sense of it was kind of very real and very grounded, and not like a lot of these other franchises that went in the supernatural direction. And so for me, the voice changer thing just seems very kind of out of place for this franchise, and I could kind of believe that maybe you could make something like that now, but in the year 2000 I just don't really see it. So I personally wasn't really a big fan of that aspect of it. I think what Scream 3 ultimately suffers on is that it feels a lot more cliche than most of the other Scream films. And what's great about the Scream franchise overall is the sort of meta aspect of it, the self-aware aspect of these movies. And Scream 3 overall, I think, definitely feels the least in touch with that aspect compared to all of these other films. And it was very intentional for them to go in a bit more of a silly, goofier direction, which honestly, I can get why some people would take a big issue with that. I personally didn't have too big of an issue because, I love lots of cheesy, fun horror movies. To the setting of it, the fact that it's my favorite setting, I also kind of feel like they don't really do as much with the concept of that they set up with this one. I feel like there's just so much you can do with it taking place on a set of a Stab movie that they ultimately, it doesn't quite live up to its potential, I think. So it's not a bad film at all. It's just, I think when you compare it to the other movies, it's the one that it just doesn't quite stack up to the same level. But it's still a fun movie, and I really enjoy it. And if somebody says, let's watch Scream 3, I am there and I'm going to have a fun time. So that's Scream 3 at number 6. And then at number 5, we have the most recent entry in the Scream franchise, Scream 6. I was very much one of those people that was like, this is Neve Campbell's franchise. You can't do a Scream movie without Sidney Prescott. But honestly, I have to say I was proven wrong, and they actually managed to do a great Scream movie. Getting out of Woodsboro, the New York setting, I think worked really well. The opening scene, I think, was easily one of the strongest of the franchise. And I personally love the whole setting at the end, with it being, the museum of Stab, the museum of the Ghostface, that whole setting. And even though, again, Sidney was not in this one, this one and Scream 5, I think, just both did such a great job of honoring the franchise and honoring the legacy of Scream. And it just feels like there's so much love and respect for the previous movies while still being willing to take it in a new direction. And my favorite part of this whole movie is easily we finally get to see Gale on the phone with Ghostface. I mean, how long away has that been? And I also really loved the addition of utilizing social media, which again, in this day and age, totally makes sense for them to utilize that in, the Scream franchise of all things. But I'm also glad that they didn't do too much with it, but I would be curious to see if, going forward, they start to utilize that a little bit more. I mean, Chad should have died. I mean, there's a certain amount of times that you can get stabbed in one of these movies and have it be believable. But once you get stabbed a certain amount of times, it's like you should be dead. And I just think that Chad, as happy as I was for the characters and stuff that he was alive at the end, I mean, at the very least, he should not be able to walk at this point. I mean, yeah, so that was a little bit like, I wasn't really the biggest fan of that. Yeah, so that's Scream 6 at number 5. And then coming in at number 4, we have Scream 5, or Scream 2022, or just Scream. But let's face it, the fact that they called the last movie Scream 6 de facto pretty much makes this movie now Scream 5, but I'm sure I'll at least get one or two comments like, actually it's called Scream 2022 or just Scream. I mean, that to me obviously was clearly sort of, again, very much going in the meta direction of, a lot of franchises where the reboots are just like, Halloween 2018, where they just don't even bother giving it a subtitle, they just call it, Halloween. That definitely was very intentional. But that said, I still think it was kind of stupid, and I wish they would have just done what they did with Scream 6, where they color in the M so it makes like a V for 5 or something. And by the way, that's another thing that I forgot to mention with Scream 6, that I'm really not happy that they switched the Roman numerals. I was so happy that Scream was one of those franchises that wasn't going with nonsensical subtitles, that they were just going to go Scream 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they chickened out a little bit with switching to the Roman numerals. And look, it's cool how they did it and made it part of the M, but it's just, I wish they would have stuck to their guns and just kept numbering them simply, like that. And I really hope that Scream 7 is just going to be called Scream 7. I really hope so. Did a really great job of bringing it up to date, having the meta commentary, especially on toxic fandoms, to me was absolutely perfect and totally in line with the franchise, and absolutely made sense for a modern Scream movie. And there are some people that I see that do kind of hate on that aspect of it, and I really don't understand why. I honestly have to question if you've seen the previous Scream movies, if you think that commentary and meta aspect of it is out of line. It is perfectly in line with this franchise and with the previous movies, and it totally felt like a absolutely natural way have that meta aspect, in the same way that Scream 4 was about remakes and reboots and stuff like that. The one thing honestly that I didn't like about this movie, and also Scream 6 as well, was Ghost Billy Loomis. And this, again, like I said before, the Scream franchise is one that for the most part is pretty grounded. There's no ghosts or zombies or supernatural shenanigans. So just to have this whole vision thing where Sam is visioning her father, and I didn't mind the whole thing with Billy Loomis being her father and the way that they worked that into the plot. I just thought it didn't make any sense for her to be having visions of him, especially the way he looked in the first Scream. So that, to me, that whole aspect, again, it's a very, very small part of this movie and the sixth film, but it definitely was something that kind of bothered me. This is probably going to be, I'm assuming, the last Scream movie that takes place in Woodsboro, so I honestly love that we went back to Stu Macher's house. I love that, and the way that they recreate the shot of the original film I thought was great. So had this been honestly the last movie of the franchise, I would have been very, very pleased and happy with it as an ending to the franchise overall. But of course it's not, it's still growing strong, and this to me was definitely a great entry overall. So that's Scream 5 at number 4. And then at number 3 we have Scream 4. And it sadly was, of course, the last film that Wes Craven directed before he passed away. And this movie, to me, honestly, I think is pretty great. There was a time when this actually was my second favorite of the entire franchise, and I do have a little bit of nostalgia for this one simply because it was the first one that I saw after seeing the first Scream movie for the first time. And I specifically remember, like it was yesterday, when this movie was coming out and, you know, seeing the advertisements for it and being, you know, so excited and intrigued by it. And it was, of course, supposed to be the start of a new trilogy. And I honestly don't know why they didn't continue with the trilogy, because when you look up what the box office was, I always had the impression that this movie did terribly at the box office, but it made back like twice its budget. It was the least grossing of all the Scream movies. I mean, it was still profitable, so I really don't understand why they didn't decide to continue with this. Overall, I think Scream 4 does do a really great job of, again, updating the meta commentary of it. The fact that it, you know, deals with, you know, the whole thing of horror remakes, which of course there have been so many horror remakes that had been coming out, you know, in between Scream 3 and Scream 4. And one of my favorite scenes of the whole movie is, of course, the character of Kirby, who's easily the best character in the whole movie, is just naming off all the remakes. That scene is absolutely iconic and wonderful. And this, of course, has one of my all-time favorite lines in any horror movie or movie ever, which is, you know, the infamous "Don't F with the original" line. First time I saw this movie and that line came on, I was just like, yes! Oh, because I had watched a bunch of really poor remakes and reboots up to that point, and I was so happy to, you know, when that line came on, it was great. But one of the things that honestly makes Scream 4 one of the strongest entries to me is the twist with the reveal of it being Jill, of course played by Emma Roberts, whose performance in this honestly is great. And I think, to me, this might actually be the strongest killer reveal of the entire franchise, maybe even more so than Billy and Stu in the first film. And the way that they just reveal that, and that scene where she is just like throwing herself into the wall and stuff, like seeing the lengths that this person is willing to go to portray this lie, to portray this story that they're conducting, is really just like, I mean, the first time I saw that scene where she throws herself back into the glass coffee table, I was like, what? Like, I was just in shock. I mean, it's so great. And then the sequence in the hospital when they revealed that Sydney's still alive, and then that whole thing, just great ending, great movie. That's Scream 4 at number 3. And then coming in at number 2 is, of course, Scream 2. This, to me, is still to this day easily the strongest of all the Scream sequels, and this movie gets honestly pretty close to matching the quality and level of the first film. I know for a lot of people they would honestly argue that it's even better. Fantastic, fantastic movie, and again, the way that they incorporated the meta commentary about sequels in this was just so perfect. And I remember we're just watching this for the first time and just being absolutely mesmerized by it and its commentary and stuff, and it works so well. Even now, it just those aspects of it just are still work so well and are so fresh, and the way that it just builds on everything that the first movie established and just goes in its own direction at the same time is fantastic. I think it's great, and it's surprising when you go back and watch and you see all the little hints that we get as to, you know, who the killers are and stuff, and the whole ending sequence I think is fantastic. There's so many great just moments in this. Look, and it sucks that you know, Randy dies in this, because Randy probably is my favorite, you know, character of the entire franchise, but you know, the way that he goes out and the way that they serve the story in this is great. Like, of the making fun of sequels and sequel tropes and stuff, it just works so well. And the opening scene in the theater with Jada Pinkett Smith is, to me, honestly, pretty much almost on par with the opening of the first movie. It's such a great opening, and it's like, for a Scream movie to really work, I feel like you gotta get those two things right. You've got to have a solid opening, and you've got to have a solid ending with a good twist as to who the killers are. And yes, Scream 2 is a wonderful, fantastic, and probably one of the strongest horror sequels that's ever been made. So that's Scream 2 at number 2. And then, of course, at number 1, no one's surprise, is the original Scream. This, to me, is, you know, when I think of Wes Craven, I think of this movie. I mean, this is, to me really his masterpiece. This is such a fantastic film. It's one of my all-time favorite films, and it's honestly easily one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It's crazy how much this changed the genre of horror after this movie came out. And there really hasn't been, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of popular and solid horror movies, but I honestly really don't feel like things were radically changed as much as before and after this movie came out. I mean, even today when you watch it, so much of the commentary and aspect of it making fun of horror tropes still just works so well. And I think some people, when they watch it now, they don't quite realize how groundbreaking it actually was when it comes to the meta aspect of it. The fact that, you know, a horror movie where you've actually got the characters who are aware of real horror movies and are referring to actual horror movie tropes. I mean, that really wasn't a thing before Scream. That was entirely an invention of Scream. You know, before in horror movies, you know, characters in horror movies don't know about horror movies because horror movies don't exist. But here we've got Scream totally playing into that, and it works so well on so many levels. The characters are wonderful. It's just a wonderful, excellently well-crafted horror movie, and it's easily one of the greats and still remains to me as the best of the Scream franchise. So there we go, guys. That was the way that I personally would rank the Scream films. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know how you would rank the Scream franchise. And for those of you who are watching this in the future, feel free to include Scream 7 and let me know what you thought of Scream 7. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.